Hello and welcome to the Georgia Finance and Housing Authority video tutorial. This video is intended to demonstrate basic navigation, features, and functionality within your custom ClientTrack solution. Note that in several places throughout this training video, I will be referencing the HMIS user manual given to you during your ClientTrack implementation. Please be prepared to make note of page numbers so you can revisit specific topics that are further detailed in that manual. If you are logging into ClientTrack to follow along, please visit page 4 of your user manual for information on logging in and selecting the proper workgroups and organizations that are applicable to you specifically. We'll begin our training with a brief introduction to basic navigation elements within your solution. ClientTrack consists of several basic areas on your screen. This is the primary work window. The primary work window is the main portion of the screen where you enter, edit, view, and review data. This is the menu panel, and it is always found on the left side of your screen. Use the options in the menu panel to perform your daily tasks such as client intakes, assessments, services, and referrals. The options that appear in your menu panel directly relate to the workspace you are in and the entity you have selected on your screen. You have the option to choose the appearance of your menu panel using the menu pin icon. By clicking this pin, you can choose to always show the menu panel or hide the menu panel when inactive. This is the Entity Toolbar. This identifies which entity you are currently working with. For instance, on the client workspace, the Entity Toolbar will display the client you have selected. On the Provider tab, the Entity Toolbar will display the provider name that you have selected. Because we are in the Home workspace, my name and user information is displayed as the entity. Note that if no entity has been selected, the Entity Toolbar will appear empty and some menu options may not be visible. Use the Find functionality in each workspace to select an entity to ensure all of your menu options are available to you. This is your Workspace Carousel. The Workspace Carousel button brings up several workspaces you can navigate to, depending on what tasks you need to accomplish. These workspaces include a home workspace, a client workspace, and a support workspace. Note that these workspaces may or may not be visible to all users depending on their job functions and the user rights that have been set up by their system administrator. The global search functionality will give you the ability to search both data and tasks within your solution. For example, a search of the name Johnson will return a list of all Johnsons in the database regardless of whether that is a client, user, provider, etc. Clicking on the desired name will take you to the correct location within the application. Similarly, if you are looking for grant functionality, you would type grant into the search bar. You would then be presented with a list of all locations where grant is present. The fixed header at the very top of your screen remains constant no matter where you navigate in ClientTrack. This area displays simple actions like sign out, help, and personal settings. You can access these settings by clicking on your name. From here, you can change your workgroup, organization, and location. You can also select a different visual theme should you so desire. Now that you're able to navigate through ClientTrack, let's take a look at some functionality on your home workspace. The first thing you see when you log in will be your user dashboard. At the top, you'll see any important news that the Office of Supportive Housing wants to communicate to users. This may include upcoming trainings, schedule changes, etc. Your user dashboard will also display a list of your current program enrollments at a glance. The menu panel on your home workspace contains a section called My ClientTrack, which houses a list of tools designed to grant you easy access to your current clients and tasks, and we'll briefly walk through each of these. Recent displays any and all entities you've recently worked with. To continue working with one of these, simply click the entity and you'll be taken to the appropriate page within the solution. Active Cases displays a list of your current active case assignments. Click the icon next to a client of interest to be brought directly to their client dashboard. To view inactive cases, click the button in the top right corner. The Current Enrollments page displays all open enrollments by program. Select a program that you have access to from the drop-down menu. Remember, your program access is dependent entirely on the organization you are in. As with the previous form, click the icon next to a client of interest to be brought directly to their dashboard. The Quick Services Multiple Clients form is used to quickly and efficiently record one service for multiple clients. Select a service screen and a specific service date and units that you would like to record. Once you have defined a service, you may use the search icon on each row below to find clients to post that service to. Once finished, hit Save and Close. My User Configuration is a menu option that can be expanded to display additional options. Within My User Configuration, we have My Information, which is used to populate forms where I may be listed as a case manager or associated individual. My Team is a form that lists any individuals that have you assigned as their supervisor. Note that the help text at the top of the screen also informs you what actions can be taken for each user listed on this page. Lastly, you have the option to change your password if needed. The next option under the My Client Track menu is Paused Operations. Paused operations display a list of forms and workflows that have been paused. You can either resume the process where you left off or delete the process if it is no longer needed. Training documentation houses any files your system administrator has deemed fit for training references. Lastly, we have My Submitted Issues, which lists any issues, questions, or suggestions that have been submitted by you, as well as their status and who they may be assigned to. You can filter these results by clicking on the Issue Status box at the top of the form. The next items you'll see on your Home Workspace menu panel pertain to Client Track's immense reporting capabilities. Your reporting options have been divided into Hmis Reports and Standard Reports. Under your Hmis Reports, note that the arrow indicates that this menu item can be expanded for additional options. Your Standard Reports include some Client Track basics, including service summary reports, demographic reports, etc. In-depth information on standard reports, as well as the nuances of Hmis reports, can be found beginning on page 48 in your user manual. Now that we've discussed navigation and seen the extent of our home workspace, we're going to move to our client workspace by clicking on our Workspace Carousel. Note that when you move from workspace to workspace, the last entity you were working with will be the first to appear on the page. If this is your first time navigating to this workspace, you will need to use the Find Client functionality to bring up an entity to work with. Remember, you will not see any of the case management menu options unless you have a client entity selected. We're currently seeing the user dashboard of the most recent client I was working with for the purpose of this training. We will walk through the intake process for a brand new client later on in this video, but for now, let's take a look at Sherry's client record to get a better understanding of the client workspace and accompanying menu options. Find Client will open up a search form. As noted previously, you will need to find and select a client entity in order for the case management menu options to appear. You can search by one or more of these fields, or if you wish to see a list of all clients in the system, simply leave the text fields blank and click Search. Once you have identified the client you'd like to work with, simply click on that row and you will be taken to their dashboard. The Project Intake and RI Project Data Intake each launch entry workflows that we will revisit later on. Next, we have the Case Management menu grouping, which is going to display all of the case management type functions available for our selected client entity. The client dashboard is going to bring you back to this page, which defaults as the first form to open on any selected client. The dashboard will contain the client's demographic information at the top, followed by their current enrollments and any services they have received. Note that the enrollments have a blue action button next to them, which contain quite a few options for that particular enrollment. You can edit the enrollment workflow, which will take you back to the initial workflow forms that were completed upon intake for this client. You can also add a family member or view case members. You can provide an update or annual assessment if needed. You can link any existing assessments or view associated assessments. You can exit the enrollment, which opens the exit workflow. You can review entry assessments in a read-only format. And lastly, you can delete the enrollment entirely. If additional clarification is needed on each of these functions, full explanations can be found on page 10 in your user manual. For services listed on the dashboard, you can edit or delete them by clicking on the appropriate icon. The next menu option we have here is Edit Client. Note that you can either click directly on Edit Client or hover over it to expand for additional options. Clicking directly on Edit Client will open the basic client information form in a format that can be edited. Perhaps in this instance, Sherry is now expecting a child, so we would be able to come to this form and change that bit of information that was collected upon her intake. As always, click Finish at the bottom of the form to save and close. Remember, there are also options available to you by hovering over the Edit Client option. You can upload a client photo or use the camera icon to open up the camera feature on your computer to take a photo on the spot. You can view the information release for this client's record, but please ensure that you have read the Data Sharing Information section of your user manual before proceeding with any edits to an information release. This can be found on page 9. Under Edit Client, you also have the ability to add or view any existing interested others, add or view any notifications pertaining to this client, or add or view a list of addresses or aliases to form a referenceable history of those known names and locations. Beneath Edit Client, we have the Case Note functionality. This will open a form displaying all current case notes for this client. You can add a new case note or print case notes by clicking the Print checkbox next to one or more case notes, and then clicking Print Selected in the top right corner. Similar to the Edit Client menu option, the Assessments option can either be clicked on directly or hovered over to expand for additional options. Clicking directly on Assessments will open up a list of any master assessments. For example, Sherry's entry assessment is listed here. If we hover over the Assessments option, we see several other types of assessments that may have been completed for this client. These can be viewed by clicking on the category of interest. For example, we can see Sherry's latest financial assessment completed here on March 1st, and we can edit the information in that assessment or delete that assessment using the blue Action button. The next three options are relatively straightforward. Referrals allow you to add and manage existing referrals to providers. Services allow you to add and manage existing services provided to this client. And enrollments display a list of current and past enrollments along with their accompanying date and enrollment and exit IDs. Next, we have the household members for this client. If we click directly on household members, we can see the selected client's family members. Note that you can add a new family member directly from this form as well. Be sure to note that when entering data on a form like this, you may need to scroll to the right to see additional fields. Lastly, we have paused workflows. This lists any workflows for this client that have been started or partially completed and then paused. You have the option to resume these workflows directly from this form using the appropriate icon. Now that we've gone over the menu options available for existing clients, let's walk through entering a new client into the system. The intakes visible in your client workspace are dependent upon the workgroup you are in, or in simpler terms, dependent on your job role. For example, because we are currently logged into the Hmis Programs workgroup, I'm seeing the project intake and the RI project data intake. But watch what happens if I switch to the Street Outreach workgroup. I'm now seeing the Street Outreach intake. So again, important to remember that your job role and consequently your workgroup affects what intake workflows are visible to you. Now, for the sake of this training, we're going to switch back to the Hmis Programs workgroup and walk through a standard project intake. When you click Project Intake, you'll notice a new panel open up on the side that has a list of steps. This is how you know that you're in a workflow. you'll notice that these steps change color once they've been completed, and oftentimes, additional steps will be added depending on the answers a client gives during the intake process. The first step of the workflow is going to ask if you'd like to add a new client. Use the current client entity, which in this case would be Sherry McGill, or search for another existing client. Today, we're going to select Add a New Client. The first step to entering a client is searching their name, social security number, and/or birth date to ensure you are not entering a duplicate client. For example, if I type James Robinson, we can see that several of those records exist already. If this was indeed a new James Robinson and not a duplicate, we would click Next. But for the sake of an easy search later on, let's enter a different name. The basic client information form is going to contain identifying and demographic information about your new client. Note that anything with a red asterisk next to it is required in order to move on to the next step in the workflow. Note that if you do not enter data into a required field, you will receive an alert at the top of the form, informing you what's missing. So we'll make sure we enter that ethnicity and click Finish to move on. Notice how that initial workflow step is now green with a check mark, indicating that this step is complete. The next step would be to enter any family members that James might have. Remember to scroll to the right to ensure you don't miss any data fields. If James does not have any family members attached to this enrollment, you can simply click Save and Close without entering any new data. Also, important to note that on some forms, you will see two buttons at the bottom of the form for saving. Clicking Save will save the changes made to the screen, but leave you on that same page, while Save and Close will save the changes you've made and move you on to the next form or workflow step. Next, you're going to select the program enrollment. Note that the programs in this drop-down list are based on the organization you belong to and are logged into. For the sake of this training, we'll enroll James into United Way's Street to Home Recovery. Note that when you select a program, the household will populate into the form. So if James had any family members we had entered previously, they would be present here as well, and we could choose if we wanted to enroll them by clicking on the checkbox at the beginning of each line. So we'll enter James' entry data and click Save to move forward. Now, notice in your workflow progress over here that James has had his own little starred step appear. If James had a son or daughter or wife we were enrolling as well, they would also appear as a starred step. This ensures that you are entering assessments and necessary intake information for each individual being enrolled. So once James' information was entered, it would jump to the next individual. So if during your intake process you see multiple steps for each individual, that's why. The next step is the Hmis Universal Data Assessment. Similar to previous forms, anything with a red asterisk is required. If you have a need for additional clarifications of the fields on this assessment, please visit page 21 in your user manual. You'll notice at the top of each assessment an option to default the last assessment. This will not apply for brand new client intakes, but it may be relevant for enrolling clients into other programs. Now, you'll notice some conditional logic here. Because we entered James' veteran status as yes on that first basic information form, we are seeing the veteran assessment pop up. So we'll complete that and click Save to move on to the next step. Next, you'll see the income assessment with a lengthy description here included in the help text that comes directly from the Hmis data manual. This is present should you need that additional clarification while entering this information. The next step is asking for details on James' use of any crisis services such as emergency rooms, jails, inpatient facilities, etc. The education assessment is going to ask for the highest grade of school completed and any current enrollment status information. Note that none of this information is required and may not be applicable for each and every client. Now that we've entered that information, we're finished with James' project intake. Now, before we click Finish, I just want to point out that you do have the ability to click back through the steps you've already completed in the workflow. For example, perhaps James just remembered his Social Security number, so we can click back to the basic client information, enter the security number, click Finish, and now we're back to our Finish workflow page. Once we've finished James' project intake workflow, we're brought to his dashboard where we can utilize those case management menu options we went over earlier. Our other option for intake workflow is the RI project data intake. It is similar in many ways to our standard intake with some additional assessments per HUD standards. So here we have a 17-year-old client who's being enrolled, and we've already entered her basic information, family members, and chosen a program enrollment. So we can see the income assessment and use of crisis services just like our standard intake. Only now we can also see that we have an employment assessment. So we'll enter some employment status information here and click Save to continue to the child education assessment. Next, on this education assessment, we'll say this individual is not enrolled currently, so we'll get some additional options that populate here. You'll notice quite a bit of conditional logic on each of these workflow forms, as they are dependent on the answers provided by your clients. Finish the workflow to complete your RI intake, and you'll once again be brought to your new client's dashboard where you can utilize those case management menu options. This concludes our training video, and remember, if you have additional questions, please reference your user manual or contact your system administrator for assistance.